like so many of my talking primitive videos, and just like the last one, they're inspired by issues that I run across on internet forums and Facebook groups and stuff like that with people, and it brings up a really good topic that people need to hear some stuff about from somebody that's really done it before. Um, I will. I'll disclose. You'll probably see my son running around and in here playing with Legos and all that kind of thing. I got him today. I like to watch him a lot, and I don't like to pen him up and tell him he has to stay somewhere while I do a video. And typically I do it on the days I don't have him. But today I got it. Today I want to talk. So I know most of you don't mind kids running around. Here he comes right now. There he goes. So anyway, let's get on to the conversation. I want to discuss what I heard or what I read on a Facebook group about primitive living skills or primitive hunting skills, saying that to practice primitive hunting skills is good, but you don't have to kill an animal to practice it. And basically, I'm going to call bogus on that, because I remember I kind of do this for a living. I make stuff for people all the time, and so therefore I'm also out using it all the time, and I understand what it takes to use it. So I try not to drag this video out to be a super long one, but there's so many aspects to this that I want to cover. I don't even know that I can possibly convey them all in one single video, but we're going to give it a try. What happens when people make things or practice skills of doing something, and then they hang it on the wall, is they've made art, or what they think is a usable tool because somebody else told them it was okay and that's as easy as, or they just have a complete misunderstanding of it. If you don't put it to practical use, then you can never, absolutely never ever understand what it takes to actually use it. It's one thing to build equipment, and it's another thing to take that equipment and go kill a deer with it. There's two totally different things, and there's a lot of different aspects to this. So I'm going to try to do it without stumbling back and forth. The first aspect is the hunting itself. If you're not a hunter, you'll never be able to understand this unless you hunt. But or even if you're a gun hunter for that matter. Hunting is not as simple as walking into the woods and shooting an animal. I don't know how many people, grown adults, that have never hunted in their life, say, how hard can it be? You walk into the woods. How hard can it be? You walk into the woods, there's a deer, it's Bambi, you shoot it. I hear it all the time from people. Oh, it's just that was a little clip, kind of like from My Cousin Vinny type of thing. Even if you know what I'm talking about, it wasn't word for word, but it's that idea. Hope nobody gets upset at my accent. I don't even know where it's from. Somewhere in New England, I imagine. Anyway, what we have is people that have never hunted say, how hard could it be? Let me tell you something. Hunting a deer is a lot more difficult than walking into the woods and shooting it. Now, if you're a gun hunter and you live in a high deer population state, it may not be any different than walking out the door, waiting for a half hour for one to show up in the field and you shoot it. When you go out into the woods with a primitive bow and arrow and expect that you're just going to walk out and shoot a deer, you are horribly mistaken, because I hunt many, many, many days out of the year to kill 1, 2, or 3 deer a year, whatever I need to basically fill the freezer. Now what happens is you can't shoot the same number every year. You can't rely on it. If I kill 3 one year and we only really eat 2 in my family, then I still kind of have 1 left over. The next year I may shoot 1 or 2. I'm not going to continue to stack meat up. That's what we do. When we fill the freezer, we stop. That's how it is for us. It's important. So while I've killed, a lot of deer, and I have right now a 9-year streak going where I've killed at least 1 deer a year with my primitive bow. And there's not a lot of people that can say that. There are some out there, and those people I applaud, because they understand what I'm talking about. When they watch these videos, they're going to say, I know exactly what you're talking about. And these other people that think that it's so easy to do, and they say that they don't need to practice anything because how hard could it be, they're going to be sitting there saying, I agree with him completely because I understand how difficult it is. So if you've never done it, you can't say how easy or how not easy it is, because you can't even grasp the concept of going out and doing it. So that is one reason that it is super important. Because what happens is people practice these skills or make things or whatever for a couple reasons. Sometimes it's the artistic quality and they just want to make it and hang it on the wall, and that's perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with it. But then you can't preach that you know about primitive hunting and things like that if you're just making it to hang on the wall. Other people do it because it interests them, and it also feeds the idea of like being a prepper or preparing for an apocalypse or a catastrophe. And that's what a lot of people end up doing it for. I'm kind of like a little bit of everything. I just kind of grew up doing this stuff, so it's just who I am. But the people that do it as from like a prepping standpoint, saying, well, they've taken the approach that I've always believed in, saying, well, you know, primitive man has lived here for thousands of years before anything that we had modern. So if we had a catastrophe and we went back to primitive times, if you learn primitive skills and know how to do it the way they did 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, then if they were able to survive, then you would be able to as well. Of course, there's still more involved in that. It is very difficult. They were brought up in that life where we would be thrown into it drastically, not knowing. It would be very, very difficult. But people looking at it from a prepper standpoint say, well, as long as I know how to make, if I know how to make an arrow, or know how to make a bow, I can always go out and kill a deer with it. Well, if you have no hunting background whatsoever, you will starve to death long before you ever kill an animal, unless it's just by sheer luck. And then once you've eaten that one and moved on to the next, you will die again, because you cannot expect to be a non-hunter or even a gun-only hunter and walk into the woods with primitive equipment and be successful. It simply does not work like that. I can promise you, hand on my heart, guarantee that it does not work like that. You can't just decide that one day you're going to be a hunter and you're just going to go into the woods. It takes years and years and years of dedication and learning just about hunting, let alone forget all this stuff, forget all the bows and arrows. Just the hunting aspect of it takes years to learn and master. And if you don't practice it, then what you're making for your prepping or for your primitive skills that you're practicing has no application behind it. You're never going to be able to use it. That's kind of like saying if you're these things would go hand in hand, but it doesn't really make as much sense. It's kind of like saying that you go to school to be a doctor, and you go through all the education stuff, you go through all the classes, all the tests, and you pass, and you have a degree in medicine. But that doesn't make you a physician just because you have a degree in medicine. And the reason is because you've never touched a patient, you've never treated a patient, and you don't know what it's like to actually do that. That is why they require you to do a residency where you go with a doctor, a physician that's already doing this, and that's when you actually learn to deal one-on-one and put your education to practical use. And it's the same thing, and people say, well, that's different. You know, you're being a doctor, it takes years to do. Well, guess what, people? It takes that 10 years in school or 8 years in school, it takes that long to learn and be proficient at primitive skills too. It doesn't, you don't have to have a degree in it, but to think that you're going to learn it all in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, you're sadly mistaken. You have to devote your life to this to be proficient at doing it. And that's the truth. You can't just walk into it and decide that one day I can do this. You either dedicate your life to knowing these things and learning them, or you're just kind of making artful pieces to hang on the wall, or you're feeding this false sense of ability within yourself, which is kind of fun too. But if you're serious about doing it, you have to dedicate it and you have to do it. And just making or reading a book about hunting or making a bow and arrow isn't learning primitive skills. You have to put it to practical use and test the things that you're doing. Now that we've discussed kind of the hunting aspect and putting that to use, if you're a hunter and you know how to hunt and you've killed some deer, and so now you understand how it is, but you want to make primitive equipment, a lot of times the modern hunters, the compound hunters, even the modern traditional guys don't understand that primitive stuff, it's not as simple as walking out and shooting a deer. There's so many people out there, especially gun hunters, that say, if I put the crosshairs in the middle of the deer and pull the trigger, I'm going to kill it. Sorry, my throat was getting pretty dry there. And so they think that I will walk out in the woods with a bow and arrow, and when a deer shows up, all I have to do is hit it. I've heard that so many times from people that have never done it, or that they've done it once and maybe gotten lucky and killed a deer. But they think that just because a deer is standing there, that you can hit it with an arrow and it's going to just cripple up and die and you're going to get it, or it'll run 30 steps and fall down and die. And it does not work like that at all. It is so easy, and I am not lying, so easy to hit a deer with a bow and arrow, hit a deer with an arrow, shot off of a bow, and lose it. It is incredibly easy to lose a deer. It is much more difficult to kill the deer ethically and find it. It is incredibly difficult to do so, and people don't understand that. And what happens is people make their bow and arrow, it's not fully tested, they don't really understand that you have to hit a deer perfectly. It's precision archery. It is not lobbing it and hitting the animal. I have seen so many people walk into the woods with bows and arrows that they made that they are going to kill a deer with, and tell me, I lost 2 deer this year. I shot them and I never found them, and they ran off. Now, to show you a couple arrows here, and we'll make a couple points. I'm going to show you this arrow first. It's got an obsidian point on it that is extremely sharp. Extremely sharp. A cane arrow and turkey feather fletchings.
Papa,
Yes, buddy?
I like that arrow.
Oh, you like that one? Well, thank you. This arrow here that you just saw is a proven killing arrow. It flies perfect. I have killed a deer with this arrow. Not this point. I've taken the point that I killed the deer with and I put it in my collection of points. I have a display case for them. But the arrow itself, I've cleaned it off, straightened it, and it is a proven killing arrow, and it flies beautifully, perfect, and penetrates well. Now let's look at this arrow. That's the one that my son says that he likes. It's got a beautiful obsidian point on it. It's got some nice little decoration. It's a nice hardwood arrow. It looks awesome. It's got nice colors, beautiful fletching, and the nocks are painted. This is a display arrow. As fancy as it looks, it does not mean it can kill a deer. I made this for decoration, and it is advertised as such. I have it on my business Facebook page right now saying that this is for sale as a display arrow. It's not meant to hunt with. At this point, I can rub it on my skin and it does not cut me. If I did that with that arrow, I'd be running to go get a box of Band-Aids because it will jack you up. This is for display. I've seen so many people make beautiful arrows, but not a single one of them is capable of killing a deer. You can make 1,000 arrows that look beautiful and not a single one is hunting worthy. Okay? I get you have to understand that. Just because you make the stuff, and even though you think that it's perfect, if you've never killed a deer with it, you do not know what it takes to kill a deer. There's people that I have felt so many heads, 95% of nappers make arrowheads, and I've seen other people's points that look dreadful. They're fat, they're clunky, they're chunky, they're huge, and somebody will get on there that's never done it and say, oh, that'll work, that'll kill a deer, because they don't know what it takes. They say, well, I found one in a cornfield that looks like that, so the Indians used it, so that'll kill a deer. Well, that's not true. The Indians didn't use garbage. They were very, very intelligent with the things that they made, and very good craftsmen. They did not make crude, haphazard things. If they actually used a clunky point, it was shot as a blunt and to kill a rabbit or something that's easy to kill. Or it was actually one that they found in the cornfield. It was one that was junk that it didn't get made into a good looking point. The piece of stone was no good and they discarded it. And that's why, so just look at a point and say, oh, that'll kill a deer. It doesn't matter how pretty this point is. It's not sharp. There's nothing about this. If you kill a deer with this, it's because you killed it with a puncture wound and you got lucky. Likewise, if you shoot a deer with this and kill it, it's going to rip all the flesh that it touches to shreds because it is incredibly sharp. The serrated edges, it is terribly sharp. Seriously, if I rub it across my hand, it will cut me open. So that being said, just because you make it and you think that it's beautiful and you think that it'll kill deer doesn't mean that it actually will, and you will never have an idea on what it takes to kill a deer unless you've done it. So you can have the best looking stuff in the world and it not be worth anything. And then other people say, well, I made it and I went out and I shot it into hay bales and it shoots good, so that's good enough and it's done. Well, I'm going to go through a series of little questions here and ask you, and you need to answer honestly within yourself. If you're serious about this, you've got nobody to lie to but yourself. You don't need to type your answers in. You can if you'd like to, if you want, and you can be honest either way. I'm going to ask you a few questions about arrows and bows in general, and you can answer, did you know that? Or did you not know that? Or did you do that? First question is, do you know what spine testing is? Or spine dynamic? Do you know what that is? If you don't know what that is, then the chances of you being successful in killing a deer are next to none. If you do not understand what spine dynamic is. Spine dynamic is when you shoot an arrow and the amount of flex that the arrow has that goes around the bow. So when it's on the bow like this and you're pulling it back, when you release it, this arrow flexes around the bow. Did you know that? That's extremely important. And it's very important in the tuning of your arrow. You can't just take 5 arrows that you just built, not know anything about spine, walk out and shoot them and think they're going to fly good. It doesn't work like that. So if you don't know what spine dynamic is, then you have a lot of learning to do about arrows. Because if you walk out with 5 arrows, say you went into the woods and you cut 5 shafts and you made 5 arrows, and chances are you know nothing about actually hunting with primitive weapons, because it doesn't work like that. I will make 30 arrows and pick the best 5 out of it, because there's variables in these arrows that you can't even control, that you can't even read. Even if you have a modern spine tester and put them on and you spine them all the same, there's variables in each one of these arrows that will make them fly differently, and you have to know that. So to say that I went into the woods and I cut 5 arrow shafts and I made 5 arrows and they're all gonna shoot good is pretty much impossible. It would be like hitting the lottery, quite literally. Next question. Did you know, which I already covered this one, that your points are not sharper than they feel? I hear that so many times with stone hunters, or people that want to hunt with stone, or that think they know something about it, saying stone is sharper than it feels. When it's flying really fast, it'll cut an animal. Well, guess what? Would you ever walk into the woods, especially the hunters that have done it, with metal broadheads that you just got done scraping across the sidewalk? I mean, would you do that? I mean, they're dull, right? You can rub your hand across them and they're not going to cut. Would you go into the woods and hunt a deer with that and say that that's ethical to do? Absolutely not. Because you say, well, it's not. If it doesn't feel sharp, it's not sharp. Well, guess what? It's the same thing with stone. If it's dull, it's dull. Stone is not sharper than it feels. If it doesn't cut you, literally, look. If it doesn't cut you, what makes you think that it'll cut a deer? Just because it's pretty, it doesn't magically get sharper when you shoot it. You're fooling yourself if you think that this is going to gain some sort of magical sharpness when it's flying at a deer. It doesn't work like that. I'm not even going to attempt to do that with this one. This one is scary sharp. I mean scary sharp. And you need to know that it takes a sharp arrowhead to do that. Now, did you know that when you make a bow, say you made a bow this week, and we'll just say an Osage bow, and we'll just say it's 55 pounds. that you finished it and weighed it. It's 55 pounds. Did you know that in about a week's time, or it depends on how often you shoot it, but if you shoot that bow, leave it strung up for a few hours, hunt with it, shoot it a couple hundred times, did you know that 9 times out of 10 it will have lost weight and lost performance? So to think that just because your bow shoots a certain feet per second, if you measure all this stuff, which isn't necessarily in primitive archery, and you weigh the bow, and then you tune your arrows to fly off that bow, and they're very tune specific, like if it's a real picky bow, did you know that after a week or two it may not shoot those same arrows the same? So just because you made a set, hung it on the wall, or went out and shot it and say, it shot pretty good, then you hung it on the wall, did you know that if you actually went and hunted with that, so think about the amount that I hunt, the amount that you're in the woods when you hunt. If you carrying a bow that's braced or strung up, or you're shooting a bow on a regular basis, it's going to change weight on you. It will lose some weight, and it's unavoidable, but it's part of primitive archery you have to understand. Now, cane arrows are a lot easier about this. Why I only sell cane arrows on my site, because you can make cane arrows, and a lot of times cane will fly off of a variety of different bows and not be affected that much. But did you know that hardwood arrows, going into the woods and cutting little saplings of hardwoods and making arrows, is one of the absolute most difficult things to do and to predict? So if you cut 5 shafts and made 5 arrows, I guarantee you, I cannot even express the amount that I will guarantee you that those arrows will not fly good at all. I promise. If they fly like this down to the target or whip, and even if the point hits where you want, that will not kill a deer. That deer will run away with your arrow with about this much sticking into it because it lost all its energy and did not penetrate. And you'll never see that deer again. And you might find your arrow again down the trail, but who knows? Your arrows have to fly absolutely perfectly straight without fail. If they fly crooked, you're going to lose a lot of energy, and the chances of you killing that deer are next to none, let alone hitting where you want to on that deer. But did you know that hardwoods are so difficult to make arrows from that I won't even sell them as actually hunting arrows, because humidity changes affect these things so greatly that you can have a set of arrows fly perfect one day. The very next day you can walk out with hardwood arrows and half of them will shoot like garbage. And that's the absolute truth. If you shoot hardwood arrows, you have to know what you're doing and be able to predict which ones shoot good. Oftentimes, guys that shoot hardwood arrows will quite literally walk out before they hunt and shoot 10 arrows and take the ones that actually fly good today and set those ones aside and chip a new edge on them to be sharp, and then go out and hunt with them. Because that's the best way you're going to do it, because tomorrow they may fly different. And I'm not joking. Hardwoods are tough. I see people all the time that make hardwood arrows and say, this is my hunting set. And I just am like, oh man, they're going to lose deer if they ever even hit one. Because the chances that that arrow is going to fly good. Cane's a different story. Cane, you can go out and rely on cane. But hardwood arrows, did you know that? So if you went out and you cut hardwood shoots and made arrows and made 5 arrows, did you know that your arrows are probably not worth hunting with? And I'm not trying to be mean. I mean, really, I'm being serious about it. It's very important that you test and know these. But if you don't go out and use these things and test them and actually hunt with them and know what to expect, then you're never going to know these things that I'm talking about. And that's how serious it is. It's like, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer or discourage you from doing this. But you can't just decide one day that you're going to make this stuff and make 5 arrows, hang them on the wall, and hang a bow on the wall, and then also say that, I'm just going to, anytime that I want, I can take it in the woods and kill a deer. It is way more difficult than that. It is difficult to kill a deer under the best of circumstances with the best bow, the best flying arrows, the sharpest points. It is difficult under the best of circumstances to kill 1, 2, 3 deer a year. I have friends that hunt a lot and they kill one deer once every 2 or 3 years with a primitive bow. I'm fortunate because I've been doing this for so long. I actually feel like I kind of have a leg up on a lot of people when it comes to skill because I've grown up doing this. And even I don't knock them dead. I kill 1 or 2 or 3 a year. But that's doing really, really well with this type of thing. But, you know, it's just, you just can't expect to take something that's crude or that doesn't fly right or that's not tested and to think that I practiced it, I made it, I went out and shot the bow, and I can go out and kill a deer anytime I want. It doesn't do that. Did you know that if you want to kill a deer and you practice, the average distance of shooting a deer with a primitive weapon is probably about 10 yards. Most people that reliably do it, they say 10 yards is that spot that they really like. And did you know that if you want to hit a deer and be ethical and reliably in doing it, you need to be able to hit 10 out of 10 shots in a target about this size? And that's the truth. People say, well, I've heard us talk about the pie plate effect. Well, if you can get, 8 out of 10 shots in a pie plate, that's good enough. No, that's good enough to hit a deer. If you want to kill a deer, you need to be able to hit it in this. The size of where the heart and lungs, everything overlaps. If you put an arrow through both lungs, it'll die. But if you hit a little to the side, you hit the shoulder blade. If you hit, and guess what, folks? The stone point and stuff, I don't care how many YouTube videos you watch of people shooting stone points through dried out old shoulder blades and stuff. I don't care if you're shooting a 60-pound bow. When you shoot at a live animal that reacts when you shoot it and also gets pushed a little when you shoot it, you're not getting through that shoulder blade. I can guarantee you, if you do, it is an absolute fluke. The chances of you shooting a stone point through a shoulder blade are next to impossible. And that goes for anything. Any kind of heavy bones. Even ribs can slow down a primitive arrow. That's just the nature of hunting with primitive equipment. So, I just can't stress enough how important it is that you go out and use the things that you make. You can't tell everybody that you're an expert in primitive hunting if you've never gone out and done it before. And it's important. And even if you don't want to tell people, it's not necessarily about that you want to get on and brag about that you can do these types of things. But if you want to aspire to be a primitive hunter, or you're kind of training yourself, for this catastrophe, this apocalypse, and you want to be some sort of prepper, to think that just because you can make some pretty Stone Age looking stuff doesn't mean that you're going to be able to put it to practical use. You have to practice using it as much as you practice making it.